Hello, thank you for joining me again. Welcome back. In this section, we'll be talking about interconnectedness. This is anti-racism from an Anishnaabe perspective. We're all interconnected, not just in social ways. We're physically interconnected by the water we drink, which makes up our bodies, and just like we're all connected by the air that we breathe. In the world today, it is no longer enough to just not be a racist. We must be actively working on our anti-racism. The concept of anti-racism is understanding that we have been raised and we exist in a racist society. It is recognizing that we all have internal biases, of which we may not be aware. It's an understanding that perhaps the first thing you think about someone is not necessarily how you really feel about them, but rather a bias, an internalized idea that has come from another place. It asks the question, how can I get past my biases in the best interest of my patients or clients? Personally, I find this concept a big relief because it means that we have the capacity to change. It means I have the capacity to grow and change. An anti-racist self-reflection practice involves honestly examining how our own feelings and life experiences, including early family life, education, professional training, and influences from the media and other sources, can contribute to these biases. In session 1, I told a story about something that I had wondered as a child. I described this idea that I cannot possibly ever truly see what another person sees. This goes for all of our perceptions of the world and others around us. Now, something I commonly hear is, well, I don't see color. You may think that this is a good thing, but I'm going to attempt to explain why it isn't. My experience is that of a light-skinned Indigenous person, white presenting if you didn't know me. The odd time someone recognizes my cheekbones, but oftentimes my experience has been that people feel comfortable saying horrible things about Indigenous people directly to me. If I did have darker or more melanated skin, and you say that you can't see that, does that mean that you can't see me at all? Does it mean you will completely disregard an entire aspect of my identity? That you'll ignore all of the systemic and interpersonal racism and prejudice I have endured? If that's the case, how can you possibly provide me with adequate care? I truly think that the best direction we could go in collectively as humanity is for those who are more privileged to do some reading, learning, and self-reflection. What I want to see happening is that you will see your patients or clients in all of their fullness and richness of their being and celebrate who they are as is appropriate for you to do so in your healthcare practice. You're here. I invite you to begin or continue that journey. Hopefully it will add to your awareness, improve outcomes for your patients or clients who have been marginalized, and also give you a fuller life as well. Be humble, be teachable. We are all learning together. Now, we know that no one has had exactly the same experiences as you, and we know that we each have our own special lens of viewing the world. Anti-racism includes listening to others when they're describing to you how the world is for them, and then doing everything in your power to stop or prevent injustices from happening everywhere within your reach every day. This is an ongoing practice. I want to talk about anti-racism from an Anishnaabe perspective. Everything I'm sharing in this course comes from my perspective. It is just one perspective. You could ask 100 different Indigenous people about these issues and get 100 different answers. So let's take a look at nativeland.ca. In case you're not familiar with Turtle Island, It's the Anishnaabe name for the continent also known as North America, which is why some of the next slide includes the US. The name Turtle Island comes from our creation story. That's our name for it. Other Indigenous nations will have their own name for what you call North America. I would encourage you to learn about the people or peoples whose land you live on. You may get to a point where you'd like to begin building some relationships with them, and I would encourage you to do so in respectful ways that they welcome. I would encourage you especially to help support their initiatives in whichever ways they invite you to do so. This is the pyramid of white supremacy. This is the pyramid. It shows everything that's holding up the ongoing genocides on Turtle Island. This is not an exhaustive list. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and we don't have very much time together, so treat this more as an introduction to the topic. I am providing you with some additional resources at the end should you wish to learn more, and I hope that you will. So notice that this black line is about 1/4 or 1/3 of the way from the top. This is the line that denotes what is currently seen as socially acceptable and socially unacceptable. I'd like to point out a couple of things. On the bottom line, you can see the "it's just a joke" retort that comes often when someone challenges a racist joke. The items lower down on this pyramid don't seem as bad as the others, right? But they do serve a purpose in that they are meant to distract us from dismantling all the systems in place that allow all these items higher up on this pyramid to continue unchallenged. I'm not saying to let those things go, but I am pointing out that we can't let them distract us from building a better system that works for everyone. The real work is bringing this line down, making it clear to our society that we will not stand for anything that is holding up the genocides. There are things happening systematically, meaning that they are happening over and over and over again. And it's easy to blame these things on the system, but that system is made up of people. People who have the power to change this within their reach. Depending on your role in the system, which often comes down to what you do for work, you have the power to stop at least some of these injustices from happening, at least where you work and at least when you're on shift. What is colonization? People tend to think of colonization as an event that happened in the past and now it's over. That is incorrect. It is a process. Even more important to note that it is very much still going on. People often ask me, how so? Because it has been so normalized, people don't even notice it. Many people have heard about residential schools by now, but many don't seem to realize that those schools, which were more like concentration camps than schools, were only a small part of what Canada has done and is doing to us. There are more kids in care now than were listed in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's count of those who attended residential schools. Once in the child welfare system, it's pretty hard to get out. Adults who were in the system are kept on a list and birth alerts are issued whenever they have a baby. Ontario stopped allowing birth alerts in 2020, but they still happen here where I live. I'm mentioning birth alerts specifically because working in healthcare, this is something that you can most likely help to protect your patients or clients from. This is a place where you can have a very real positive impact. There's also the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in the court system and in poverty, and the thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit relatives, and men and boys too everywhere. Sometimes you see the acronym MMIW or MMIWG2S. Sometimes the acronym used to describe this is MMIP. Indigenous peoples are simultaneously being overpoliced and underpoliced. There is also overrepresentation in the correctional system. I have some statistics to share about Northwestern Ontario, where I live. In 2020 in Kenora, 94% of inmates were Indigenous, with Thunder Bay being at 75% Indigenous. Many Indigenous communities still don't have clean drinking water, yet they have pollution from the extractive industries and transportation corridors used for those things, which are being stolen. They call them natural resources, but those are our relatives, both human and non-human kin. I haven't seen any pictures of the RCMP arresting the children to take them to these schools, but we all know that it happened. On the left here, you can see Kent Monkman's painting, The Scream, which depicts this. And on the right, you can see that not too much has changed, except for now the RCMP is militarized. In 2017, the RCMP created the Community Industry Response Group, C-IRG, for the purpose of removing Indigenous peoples from their homes to make way for industry. They have rebranded the CIRG to CRU, or Critical Response Unit. To the west, you can see in this image here, which depicts the Wet'suwet'en Nation being invaded by the RCMP. They are also being harassed daily by private security and industry supported by the RCMP, who are trying to force a pipeline through their home, specifically the Coastal GasLink pipeline. The Secwepemc Nation is also currently defending their home from industry and RCMP invasions. The Tiny House Warriors are trying to protect their homes from the RCMP and private contractors trying to force the Trans Mountain pipeline through their homelands and sacred sites. To the east, there's a brave anonymous Mohawk group in Kanesatake who has spoken out about how they haven't been safe in at least 3 generations. The community has fallen into a state of lawlessness and danger. There are toxic dump sites, dangerous criminal activity, and land being stolen piece by piece by land developers and assimilated Mohawks treating Kanien'kehá:ka homelands as if they were all for the taking. And to the north, further north from where I live, there are some Matao communities, one of which, Niskandiga, hasn't had access to clean water for 27 years. Niskandiga has been very loud in saying that they don't want the Ring of Fire mining development that the government has promised is coming. To force any Indigenous peoples to endure any kind of development is disregarding their free, prior, and informed consent, and is by definition a continuation of colonization. So let's take a look at genocide. This is the UN's definition of genocide. To make it clear why all of this is bad, I'm pointing out here that it says any of these acts listed here constitute genocide. So that definition includes, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So Canada is actually imposing every single one of these acts on us and is still doing so today. You can see that here. A. Indigenous deaths in institutions like prison, healthcare, outside of healthcare situations, starlight tours, hate crimes. B. There are thousands of cases of MMIWG2S, the extremely high suicide rates in First Nation youth. C. The deliberate poisoning of lands and waters surrounding reserves via the extractive industry or transportation of stolen goods. The forced dependency on programs and services, the underfunding of First Nation healthcare and education and forced poverty. And D. Indigenous women and gender diverse individuals being sterilized without their knowledge or consent. And E. The child welfare industry required to care for children due to harms caused by ongoing colonial project, including birth alerts and also human trafficking. So we don't have time, unfortunately, to explore all of the evidence in our short time together, but these are the facts. I encourage you to read more about this and get involved in supporting Indigenous peoples' initiatives to correct all of these things wherever you have reach in your communities. Get seated comfortably. Close your eyes if it feels comfortable to do so. Gently bring your attention to your breathing. Notice as you breathe in and out. Notice where each in-breath begins and where it turns and becomes an out-breath. Notice the spaces between breaths. Whenever you begin to feel your mind wandering, that's okay. You can always reconnect by bringing your attention back to your breath. You can bring it back as many times as needed. Just keep coming back to the breath. Take a deep cleansing breath and imagine roots growing from under your feet and your seat. These roots grow deep into the earth. The earth holds you and loves you and provides you with everything you need. You may wish to think thoughts of gratitude for keeping you grounded during your practice and for providing you with everything you need. Take another deep cleansing breath and imagine a tiny silver thread coming out of the top of your head and going up. This thread connects you to your divinity, Creator, God, the universe, whoever or whatever your higher power, and is the source of unconditional love. You may wish to think thoughts of gratitude for keeping you connected to your divinity. Remember that you are a sacred being. Imagine energy coming up through your roots and providing you with all the support you need, and energy coming from above you, pure love, through your silver thread. This energy flows and meets right in your heart center. In your heart center, imagine a light there is an awareness that is you. When you tune into this space, you'll be able to see, hear, sense guidance from your truest self for your image. Now tune into your emotional self and notice how you're feeling emotionally. There is no wrong feeling. Try not to judge your emotion, just notice it. Now tune into your physical self and notice how you feel in your body in the physical space. Notice where your body is touching the floor and cushion. Notice if you have any tension or sore spots anywhere in your body. Send some extra tender, loving kindness to those spots. You may want to use your hands if you can reach these spots. Gently and lovingly hold the place or places that need extra care. Now tune in to your mental self and notice your thoughts. Try not to judge your thoughts, just notice them. Think about your intention for your painting and hold it in your heart. Slowly, begin to bring your awareness back to the room. Take 3 more deep cleansing breaths. Gently begin to wiggle your fingers and toes. Gently make a few small circles with your neck. Now the other way. When you feel ready, open your eyes and come back to the room. The next step is bringing vision into form. So what this means is we're going to create a coloring book outline of the image that we want to paint on our canvas. I'm going to start with a piece of charcoal, and I'm going to begin making the outline of my bear. Starting with some ears. Now you could do this with a pencil first if you wanted to, because I find a pencil is easier to erase than charcoal. Once you get to the charcoal step, it's pretty hard. Now this foot, let me just try and adjust that a little bit. You'll see it's a bit harder to adjust with the charcoal. It doesn't have to be exact, because while you paint, it will change a bit. You can always ignore lines, so I'm probably just going to ignore that small extra line there. You can go over things again. You just have to, as long as you know which lines you want to ignore when we get to the painting part. Some little details. Second eye. Okay, so I'm satisfied with the outline of the bear. Now I also had a sun in my sketch that I want to transfer onto here. Now a sun is a circle, and circles are quite difficult to draw. If there's something that you have that's a similar size or shape to the shape that you want, I recommend using that. So I've got a bowl here that happens to be about the same size as the sun that I want on this painting. So I'm going to use this bowl. It also helps for composition because I can see if I want the sun to be right there or a little further over here. Once I decide where I want the sun to be, I'm going to hold the bowl in place and using my charcoal, oops. So again, it doesn't have to be exact, but that gives you a pretty good idea of where that circle is. And the bowl helped me to make that circle to be a quite circular shape. Now, the trees that I saw over here, I want them to be more of an impressionist kind of tree. So I don't want to attempt to draw that part right now. I'm going to focus on these, the two main elements of my painting. And the next part of this step is to actually use some paint and a brush to get this going. I'm going to use black, I think. You want to use, at this step, you want to use a high contrast color. So for example, if most of your painting was pretty dark, you'd want to use white. If your painting is a little bit lighter like mine, you want to use black. Perhaps there's another color that would be a very high contrast color for your painting. That would be the one I would recommend. And for this step, I recommend using a round synthetic brush, not too big. Maybe this one. Nope, not that one. Now that I have my coloring book outline on my canvas, I'm going to go in with some paint and actually make those lines with paint. So for this part, I'm using a synthetic round brush, a small one, not too big, and I've got some black paint. I recommend that you choose a high contrast color for this step. If your painting is mostly dark colors, you would want to use white for this step. However, as you can see, my painting is mostly light colors, so I'm going to go ahead and use black. It doesn't matter where you start, but I'm going to be thinking about where the paint will be wet, and I'm going to start in that way so that I don't touch my paint with my hand when it's still wet. Starting over here. Now once you get into using some paint, one thing that my teacher Angela mentioned is to not be too precious about this step. You don't want to put too much pressure on yourself for how the brush strokes go. You want to try and use some long strokes and turn the brush as you're going so that you don't have to keep re-dipping your brush, but go ahead and do that if you feel like you need more paint. The less precious you can feel about your painting, the less attached you are to your painting, the the more you will have that freedom to allow that inner listening to come through, the more freedom to let it be what it is. Working on that second ear. Just marking out the different parts of my bear. A little bit of detail around the bear's nose. Getting the outline of all of the bear's legs in here. I'm trying, as I said, not to be too precious about those lines. I am, however, trying to make sure that I've got all of them in. Okay, that looks good for the bear. Now I'm going to get in with the sun. Let's start on this side. Before I do that, I'll just mention I'm going to leave a little space here. I'm not going to have the line touch all the way to the bear, just like on this side. One other thing about painting as a spiritual practice is to leave a glow between parts of your image, and we'll get into that a little bit later again, but I'm just going to leave a little bit of space between those two elements of my painting. So I'm not going to join it all the way. Find that outlining a circle takes a little bit of patience because I feel very challenged when it comes to making circles. There we go. So you will know that you have completed this step when you have your coloring book outline completed in paint. The next step is laying the foundation. And before we begin this step, it's important to make sure that the outline that you've painted is completely dry. I've already checked my painting and I know that it's dry. I can show you there, that's completely dry. And we're going to want to choose 3 colors for this step. We're going to begin blocking in some color here. I recommend choosing no more than 3 colors. And it doesn't matter exactly which colors you choose at this point. You don't have to choose the colors that are the color of the thing that you want it to be at the end. For example, this is a black bear, and for a black bear, I might use some dark blues or purples. I might even use a little bit of actual black, but I'm going to save that color scheme for the end. So at this point, it really doesn't matter which colors you choose. I think I'm going to probably start with a blue, a light blue, and maybe a medium yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and pour my colors. So I want to use a blue and a dark blue here. I'm going to just pour some blue. I'm going to pour that in a couple of spots because I want to make a light blue right now as well. Now, if you decide that you want to mix a color, I recommend that you mix enough of your color to fill in whichever areas you want to fill in, because once you have mixed a color and used it all up, it's very hard to match that color again a second time. And one thing to note is that if you're using white, white is a very opaque color. So anything that you want to have a little bit more coverage, for example, I'm thinking of bringing in a little bit of light blue on the snout of the bear here. By adding a little bit of white, I'm going to get a little bit more coverage on that area. So that was blue, then make a light blue, and I think I'm going to use this Indian yellow. Again, you don't need very much paint unless you're mixing a color for a large area. Okay, I've got my paint poured here. Before I mix up that blue, I'm going to show you a little bit about these brushes. So this step, laying the foundation, and some other future steps that we're going to do, you'll want to use a hog hair brush. Show you a couple here. So hog hair brushes come in different sizes, and now these ones here, you can see they're a little bit different sized, and they are pretty blunt at the top here. These ones you can see have been well used and well loved. And then there's also some more round and tapered in and smaller hog hair brushes. For smaller areas on your painting, you're going to want to choose one that's a bit more tapered in, like perhaps one of these two. I'll probably use one of these two on the snout of the bear. And when you get into actually filling in these areas, you want to choose a brush that's one size bigger than the brush that you think you're going to need. By doing this, it's going to be a little bit more out of your control, and therefore it will add a certain texture and technique to your painting. By using these hog hair brushes, you don't get the same smoothness in a line that you would get from, say, a synthetic round brush, and that's the technique that we're after. That's the result that we're after here for this part. It's going to add a bit more personality to your work. So I think I'm going to choose one that's a bit more tapered in for my bear. And then I'll choose a larger one when I get to the sun. So I'm going to use a synthetic brush actually just to mix this color. Make sure it's the color that I want. Another really great tip that I learned from my teacher Angie is if you don't like the color on your palette, don't put it on your painting. Okay, which brush do I want for this? Yeah, I'm gonna choose one that's a little bit more tapered in for the bear's nose. And I think I might start with the bear's body. Yeah. Okay, so this is the brush that I've chosen. Another way that you can choose your brush is to take your brush and rub it in your, take the brush in your dominant hand and rub it in your non-dominant hand. You'll get a feel for the texture of the brush, and in that way you can let your brushes tell you which one to choose. And yes, that has confirmed for me. This is the one I want to use. And I'm going to go ahead and start filling in some color on my bear here. So the way to load the brush with paint is you need your palette, your paint, your brush, and a rag. So what I'm going to do here is dip my brush in the paint, and on another area on my palette, I'm going to make some circles. What I'm doing here is embedding the brush with some paint. I'm also going to just dab a little bit of that off on my rag. Get yourself set up in a way that you can hold your palette and your rag at the same time. And then we're going to learn a dry, scrubby, dry brushing technique. We're going to make scrubby circular motions with this dry brush. And when you first begin, you may want to start in an area that can hold more paint. So for example, I'm going to start probably in the body of the bear here rather than any small areas in the face. And so yeah, you just get in there and start making those round circular motions. You'll notice I'm not painting all the way to the edge. This again is leaving a glow. So what's going to happen is a little bit of the painting behind the paint that I'm adding now is going to show through at the end. So it helps to add a little bit more depth and character to your work. Just getting in there with my dry circular scrubby brush. And yeah, there we go. So one thing that you'll notice about if your surface happens to be a canvas or a canvas panel like mine is if you get up really close to your canvas, you can pay attention to the weave, and you can see that there are many little squares in the canvas. And you can notice here that this technique is allowing some of that color underneath to show through. That's what we want. So you can just keep going in these larger areas. And then once you start to feel like there's hardly any paint on your brush, that would be a good time to get into some of these smaller areas. So around the bear's face. And you can press harder once there's very little paint left on your brush to get out a bit more. find the sound that the brush makes quite satisfying doing this technique. So, okay, now I'm starting to feel like there's hardly any paint on this brush, so I'm going to repeat that. Dipping my brush in the paint, and then in another area, making some circular motions on my palette. And again, I'm going to just dab off some of the excess on my rag. And again, come into an area that can take more paint. A larger area can take more paint. You'll notice again, I'm not going all the way to the edge of these sections. I'm leaving that glow so that we can see some of that beautiful pattern and color from below coming through. More here, just keep going. Now you'll notice another thing with the circular motions here, because a bear is a round, three-dimensional figure, the circular motions help to add a little bit of dimension to the animal. If you were painting something that was flat, like a door, let's say, you could, using a straight back and forth kind of a stroke, that would give more of that illusion of it being a flat surface. However, the bear being a three-dimensional round item, we don't want to have that, so that's why we want to keep going with our round circular motions. Dab some of that off. Getting in there and leaving that glow. Maybe a little bit more in here. So at this point, you may feel like there's some areas that you want to have a little bit more paint. So go ahead and add some more if you want. Okay, so that, I feel like that's the outline or the blocking, color blocking of this part of the bear. Now I'm going to add a second color to the bear around the bear's snout. Now you're going to notice that I am not even going to rinse this brush. I'm not going to dip it in my water. If you dip your brush in the water at this point, it is no longer a dry brush, and therefore you wouldn't be able to achieve this dry brushing technique. So you want to make sure that you are not putting your brush in your water until you're completely finished with that brush for that day. And then at the end of your practice, you would rinse all of your brushes. I'm going to try to remove as much of it as I can though on my rag instead of rinsing it. So I'm just going to go like that, see if I can remove most of that. I'm going to go ahead and grab the next color now. And one really beautiful thing that happens by doing this is this color will influence the next color that you choose. And it really helps to add a lot of dimension. Now this color that I'm going to use next also happens to be blue, so it won't be that noticeable. But on other parts of your painting, you will find that by not rinsing your brush, you're going to have that really beautiful effect where the previous color is influencing your next color. Okay, so now I'm going to load my brush again by dipping it in the second color that I chose. And again, I'm going to choose another area on my palette and do some circular motions. That's going to embed the paint into my brush. And then again, I'm going to dab it off on my rag to remove most of the excess. This is going to allow us to do that dry brushing technique that we're practicing now. And yeah, I'm just going to double check. You can check how much paint is on your brush again by just dabbing it on your rag. And then getting in there with that dry, scrubby, circular motion. You can start to see some of that light blue showing up on my bear. Very good. Now, I'm going to do the same thing, color blocking on my son. And I've already poured some paint for that. I'm going to use a larger brush though, because this is a much larger area and it has the potential to take more paint. So I'm going to use this larger hog hair brush. So I begin by dipping my brush in the paint, and then on another area on my palette, making some circular motions. This is how I'm embedding that color into the brush. I really get it loaded with color. And because this area can take more paint, I didn't dab it on my rag. I've just gone straight in. You can see that it is starting to get a little bit of that color. Not sure how well that color is coming through on camera because the difference is subtle. Okay, I feel like I need more paint, so getting in there again with my round motions on the palette to fully embed the brush, and then getting back in here with the round scrubby motions. Again, I'm not going all the way to the edge of the outline. I'm leaving a glow. I'm leaving a space between the color blocking and the outline. And there you have it. That is laying the foundation. Before we get to the next step, you're going to want to make sure that your painting is fully dry again.